Unbeknownst to some, there'd actually be a reason as to why Gojo would be wearing Toji's clothes right now, especially when you want to take into the fact that he's fighting Sukuna. It only brings even more questions to the table. Why Toji's clothes of all things? Especially when he's going up against Sukuna, the king of curses, who is the guy who might just be able to end Gojo's life. As I say, the Sukuna would only be around due to actually being able to take control of Megumi's body instead of Yuji's, and with Megumi's body in his hands, Sukuna has quite a few advantages over Gojo, because of course he'd be able to use Megumi's abilities. Things get even more interesting because, as we already know, Toji is Megumi's father, and we already have Megumi, who's being possessed by Sukuna, fighting Gojo, who's wearing Toji's clothes. Which gives us an interesting idea of Toji being able to fight his son through Satoru. With Gojo also being Megumi's caretaker and master, it seems only fitting for all of this to happen. Yet, Toji's clothes play a huge significance in the entire battle and the whole plot as a whole. Gojo isn't simply wearing these clothes as a fashion statement, no, nothing like that, because it actually has a way deeper meaning. To understand this meaning, we'd have to dig a little bit into Toji's character. As we know, Toji would be born without cursed energy, and he would be the murderer of the Star Plasma Vessel. All that being said, Toji would belong to the Zenin clan, with the Zenin clan, with them being a clan out of the 3 biggest families of Jujutsu in the series, they would undoubtedly value cursed techniques above all else. While Toji would not have a curse technique, and so his stance surrounding the clan would be unheard of and questionable at best, because, of course, how is someone without cursed energy going to exist in a family and be accepted by a family that values cursed techniques above all else? This would put Toji in a rough spot and make him even question his own identity. Being a Jujutsu sorcerer, Jujutsu would be one of the main things going on in his life, and probably the thing that he would value most, especially when he's also coming from the clan who cares about curse techniques more than anything. That would essentially make his values be placed heavily in the Jujutsu world. Toji would care about the world of Jujutsu, and you wouldn't have to think twice about it. This is what makes Toji's downfall as a sorcerer all the more tragic, because he still legitimately cares for the Zenin clan, yet he turns to a path of killing Jujutsu sorcerers. At the end of the day, Toji would have a love for his family, the Zenin clan, and we would know this because he would ultimately end up sparing the Zenin clan. After going into a rage that is very similar to Maki, Toji would end up choosing to spare the Zenin clan because the Zenin clan would only exist due to Toji's whim. Toji, without a doubt, would still appreciate the world of Jujutsu and his own clan that abandoned him, the Zenin clan. Making you wonder, why exactly does Gojo wear the clothes of a murderer, a guy who ultimately doesn't stand for Jujutsu? You see, Gojo would know about Toji's love and passion for the Jujutsu world, and this would be one of the reasons why he would wear his clothing. You see, when it comes to Toji facing off against Satoru, Toji would want to fight Satoru because he would want an opportunity to reaffirm his identity against the world that ultimately rejected him. He would go against this world that rejected him and kill Jujutsu sorcerers to prove a point. And this would all be an attempt to reaffirm his identity, to prove his own value, to show that his life actually had some worth, despite being rejected and thrown away by his own family and the thing that was the most important to him, the Jujutsu world. And it would be no wonder as to why he would fight Satoru. By defeating the pinnacle of the Jujutsu world, he would not only reaffirm his identity, but he would also be able to prove that he is the strongest. By defeating Gojo and proving that he's the strongest, Toji would end up proving everyone wrong. He would prove the Zenin clan wrong for rejecting him. He would prove that the world of Jujutsu was something that ultimately needed him. This is what makes the fight between him and Gojo so important. You see, Toji would be born as someone with no cursed energy, and he would be somebody who would be completely rejected by the world of Jujutsu. While in Satoru's case, he would be completely blessed by the world of Jujutsu and accepted by it. Toji and Gojo would be complete polar opposites, and this would only encourage the idea that they would be able to understand each other because they would both desire to be the strongest. Now, what relevance would this have in Gojo's fight between Sukuna? You see, Gojo would completely understand exactly why Toji would fight him. He would understand that Toji is fighting him for self-affirmation in order to reaffirm his own identity. And Gojo would be fighting Sukuna for the exact same reason. Geto would ask Gojo, are you the strongest because you're Satoru Gojo? Or are you Satoru Gojo because you're the strongest? As we already know, Ryomen Sukuna would be the king of curses, and this would end up making him the strongest in the world of Jujutsu. Gojo would end up fighting Sukuna because he would want to reaffirm his own identity. Gojo would want to prove that he is without a doubt the strongest. This would be the same reason why Toji would end up wanting to fight Satoru at all. Toji and Satoru would have ended up fighting the same fight. They would both end up fighting the strongest in the Jujutsu world to prove their own self-worth. Gojo would recognize this and end up wearing Toji's clothing in order to honor him, because he would end up fighting the same fight that Toji did. And for the same exact reason, self-worth, which would be the most important thing to these characters at the end of the day. Oddly enough, it wouldn't really seem like Gojo even needs to validate himself, because after all, he was someone who was blessed to be the strongest. He's a person that everyone already loves and respects, so why does he need to validate himself at all? With him being at the top of the Jujutsu world, as the strongest in a specific era, when it comes to the future, or even the past, if anyone else would be able to beat him, then the title as the strongest wouldn't really mean anything. Satoru's entire identity would be at stake, because if he is the strongest and he's not indefinitely the strongest, then what does that mean? It will mean nothing, and in due time, it will mean the same exact thing. Nothing. This is why there is so much weight behind this fight. Satoru is not only proving to himself that he's the strongest, but he's also proving it to the Jujutsu world, just like Toji. Rather than being rejected like Toji, he would be accepted, yet he would reject himself and want to prove that he's the strongest, which would be the exact opposite of Toji being rejected by the Jujutsu world. Satoru would reject himself because he would be unsure of how the Jujutsu world loves him, while Toji would reject himself because the Jujutsu world would reject him. From the very beginning, Satoru would have always planned to fight Sukuna, with the ultimate choice being to kill Yuji once he swallows all of Sukuna's fingers, because Satoru always wanted to fight Sukuna from the beginning. He would only let Yuji be alive because of his ego, meaning he would believe in himself so much so to a point to affirm his identity as the strongest that he would end up putting his own life in danger and putting the life of an innocent boy who has nothing to do with Jujutsu in danger, all for the sole reason of being able to claim and also prove to himself that he's the strongest. This is why this fight is so important, and this is why this fight means so much to Gojo. Without this fight, Gojo would be nothing. And it's sad to say this because in actuality, unlike Toji, he ended up having everything. Ironically enough, this would be quite similar to Satoru's domain expansion when he says, given everything, you're unable to do anything. It would be quite similar to Satoru's own life. He'd be given all of this talent and this skill, yet what could he even use it on? When he fights Toji and comes back to life, he would go as far as to seeing himself as a god. Now, is it too far-fetched to say Satoru would want to relive an experience like this? I wouldn't say so, because at the end of the day, he is actually very egotistical. This is one thing about Gojo's character that most people don't ever take into consideration. Everyone would think Satoru is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, but would that be entirely true at all? Especially when fighting someone who would be known as the King of Curses. At some point, being the strongest would just end up meaning nothing. Yet Satoru's identity as the strongest would mean so much to him that you'd even put the entire world in jeopardy just to fight Sukuna. Toji fighting Satoru would end up giving his life more value, more meaning, and the same thing can be said for the fight between Gojo and Sukuna. And this is exactly why Gojo ends up wearing Toji's clothes. Toji and Gojo come from two completely different worlds, but they are the same, regardless of being rejected or accepted, because at the end of the day, they'll risk their lives just to prove their own worth. Because after all, that is the thing that's most important to them, what their life means and what kind of weight their lives really hold. This is why Satoru will do his best to prove to everyone that he truly is the strongest.